Thank you. Just make sure you see it. Okay, so thank you, Nancy, for inviting me. I've actually never spoken here before, but I've spoken to our class at Bloomfield, and I've actually spoken at the Berkeley College in the city, which is literally next door to our office in the city in New York. So in the past, I've kind of spoken about different things about the industry. Today, I kind of wanted to focus on what is digital advertising. I kind of wanted to take a step back. Because I realized the presentations that I was doing before, people were kind of confused about what exactly is digital advertising and what does it mean? Where did it come from? How did it start? So I'm going to talk briefly about the history of it. And then because most of you are on a creative track, and this is something that we do for our clients and something that we do, how we train our employees and people on my team, is what are creative best practices for not just digital advertising. It's going to be heavily digital advertising focused, but you'll be able to walk away and use this within your own design work and take it, with you, and how will it easily translate across all the disciplines that you touch. And then I'll do a little bit briefly about what my process is, what our process is in the digital advertising working in our creative department, the things that we have to go through, some of the acronyms that you kind of hear floating around. So if you're ever in an interview or in an internship, you kind of know a little bit about that. So I always like to start with the work because I feel like the work speaks for itself. No, this isn't my personal reel. This is our creative reel. I've done some work in here, and some of it my team or other people on my team have worked on. So I'm going to start there. Okay, so pretty cool. So who am I and where have I been? This little brief resume of mine. Currently at Undertone Pixel Studios. I've worked in creative agencies around the city, from New York to Colorado, Boulder to London. I graduated, I won't say when, at Spelman College, and then I went to Miami Ad School, which is a portfolio school that specializes in helping you get into advertising. They have a creative track, they have an account track, so if anybody they have a fashion photography track as well, so if anybody has questions about that, I can talk about that at the end. And then what do I do on my day-to-day? I have a team of 6 designers that report to me out of New York, Chicago, and London, so I'm up all the time. I work on creative campaigns from concept to development, and then that means from clients to vendors to across the different departments. People think that creative kind of just works solo. We actually work with every single department within our agency. And I also, it's also my responsibility to stay up to date with the creative trends, so I know how to speak to it when clients ask, what's next, what's up and coming. I'm knowledgeable and able to talk to that. A little bit about who we are at Pixel. We're a team of creative designers. We all come from different backgrounds. Myself personally, I come from the creative agency side. We have some in-house designers, meaning they came from brands such as Nike and colleges. Actually, we have a guy that came to us from Purdue University. And then we work across all different digital disciplines and across all different screens and platforms, not just in advertising or within web apps, but also across Facebook, social. And so we're responsible for making sure that we extend a client's campaign. So they may have a television ad. They come to us and they want us to extend it to digital, so they'll hire us to do that. So we're not traditionally what you would consider the agency of record for some of these clients, but we're considered a vendor for them to create one-off creative solutions for them. So digital advertising, what is it? Where did it come from? How has it evolved over the years? And then kind of what influenced that evolution? That's kind of what I'm going to talk about. So the first is standard display. You've probably all seen this. It's this little ad that's right here in the corner. So where did it come from? Prodigy is thought to be the first company that sort of premiered this format. Does anybody want to guess what brand it was for? Think back into the 80s. Don't say like anything like Target or anything like that, because they weren't around. Anybody want to guess? Nope. Nope. It's for a retail company. Close. It was for Sears. Yeah. I don't even know if they're like still heavily around, but it was for Sears, and it was a static, what's considered a static image. So if you can imagine, a lot of people in here weren't around in the 80s. I was, but websites back then were just mostly text. So when you saw this first ad, it actually stood out back then because it was like the first image on a web page. It wasn't clickable. It just kind of just stood there. And then fast forward 13 years, another company called Global Network Navigator came around and produced the first clickable one, first one that had actual motion to it. And it was produced through Flash, which is no longer really existent now. And that one was for a law firm. So, back then advertising was a little bit dry. Back then it stood out, but now today it kind of like easily blends in. Like this is a pub page today. You can't really, does anybody really notice it if it wasn't blown up? Probably not. And they were mostly flash-based so that sort of limited the things that you could do with them, meaning the screens that you could put it on, the amount of K size it could hold. So that kind of, also the publisher placement. Publishers didn't really want it to obstruct content. So there were really, really strict guidelines and limitations to what you could do. So over time, it became more and more difficult to reach audiences. Why? And these numbers, since I've actually put this in, are out of date. So now, today, consumers are seeing over 7,000 marketing messages in a day. It's probably more like 10 to 15,000 today. And consumers have an average of 3.3 millennials. You guys probably have 4 screens. So trying to reach a consumer is a lot more difficult now. And the attention span, because of that, is limited. We always talk about in digital advertising, you have to think of it as if you're driving down the street in your car and it's a billboard that's passing you. That's the amount of time you have to reach someone in digital advertising, because there's so many other ads on the page and so many other forms of content that's trying to get that user's attention. You have to be really, really creative in how you stand out. And that's how high impact ads were born and how my company, Undertone, thrives. So the evolution of it, they're mostly HTML-based ads. That opens up a whole new realm of possibilities, meaning you can now advertise on mobile. And then from mobile, since it now represents 60% of online traffic, which again, this stat is probably out of date, what kind of what kind of solutions does that open up for your consumer, for users, and for creatives, for us? Now, contextual relevance is also important, meaning you want to make sure that you're hitting the right person at the right time. We're with the evolution of the internet, we're now able to, which is scary, you're now able to track people and their behavior online, what they're doing, where they're going, who they're visiting, what they're into. So advertising with context is now a lot more important than it was back then. And high impact ads, because they're so much more engaging and they can do so much more than the flash-based ads that that we used to have in the 80s, has a 34 times higher engagement rate in CTR. CTR stands for click-through rate. So they're more likely to click through a high-impact ad than they would a standard ad, because 80% of online traffic is thought to be going to be video in 2017. That's thanks to things like Snapchat and YouTube. So it'll continue to grow as new formats, as new things start to develop. So what do we do at Undertone again? Like, how do we create our ads, and what's sort of like the science behind it? We actually have an insights team, and it's their sole responsibility to figure out what you're doing, when you're doing it, so they're actually talking to the right person at the right time, at the right place. We're not hitting, if you're not shopping for Clinique, if you're not into makeup, we're not serving you this ad. We're making sure that we're serving people that it's relevant to their needs and their wants. And then on the creative side, my job, it's the creative best practices is what we use to make sure we're designing exactly for the user. We're not just having a CTA, which is one of those buttons down there. We're not just having a CTA up there that's learn more. We're actually driving action for the user. And we know exactly that Shop Now has an X amount more likelihood for a user to click through than a different CTA. And we also study like the colors. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just throwing red on a screen. There's a reason why it's there, and we've studied that, and we've looked at our demo, and we've studied their behaviors and what they respond to. So how do I do it? And this is where I talk, we sort of preach our creative best practices. This is where we get into what is relevant to you guys. If you don't take anything away from this presentation, I'd love for you to just remember this slide right here. This should be like the first and foremost best practice for not just digital, but anything you're doing within design. Keeping it simple. Again, remember that consumers are hit with messages all day, every day. You want to make sure that your ad stands out, and if they have to read or digest or figure out what you're trying to communicate to them, they're less likely to even look at it. They're going to tune out. So you lose them. So one or two ideas is generally enough to communicate what you're trying to communicate. Don't make your users work for it. Know where your creative is going to live and how they're going to be viewing it. If it's a poster, or if it's a digital ad, know those differences because you're talking to your audience in two different ways. Feature the brand logo prominently and throughout your ad, throughout your creative experience. You never want a user to be able to guess that, for example, the one on the right, top right, it's Nike. You never want your user to assume that it's Under Armour. You always want to hit them with the logo that just reinforces your brand message and just reinforces your brand. Feature a strong headline or a question. If you have to, I'm almost a fan of no copy because I think that you can communicate a lot through pictures and imagery. So keeping your copy simple, or if you have to have some copy, make sure your headline is strong and it invites the user in. It makes the user actually want to engage further. Design to your objectives. So when you're designing, you should always make sure that you're always answering the key objective. What is the goal of the creative that you're creating? In this case, it's you want the user to watch the video and you want the user to learn different things about the product, about the shoe. There shouldn't be anything like a game or any other like music, anything that doesn't relate to those two things. You don't need it. Make sure that you know who the audience is. I used to have a professor who used to always say that as a designer, you have to be empathetic because you have to be able to remove yourself from the design process in order to pretend that you are that person and you're designing for that person. You have to be able to talk to that person. So, if you're talking to a person who's into CrossFit, you wouldn't have a bunch of flowery language. You need to be able to talk the talk in order to design for that person. So remove yourself from that process always. Grab the user's attention through bright colors. This should go without saying, but it's worth repeating. Bright colors and imagery always draw the user's eye in. If you're going to tell a story, which is always a good thing, resolve it in a positive light. Nobody wants to end on a sad note, so resolve it in a positive light, and then invite the user to play with the product if they can. They're more likely, and this is extremely important in digital advertising, they're more likely to then go into the store and actually experience the product if you're actually allowing them to do it in the comfort of their own home or on their phone or as they're on the go. And we actually, at Undertone, we actually track users who go from the ad into store into purchase. So we can actually see that, and we actually can determine the lift, what's called the lift, from our ads. Focus content. Make sure that your content is conveyed really, really quickly. So this goes back to the copy. Making sure that you don't have paragraphs and paragraphs of copy. Keep it simple. 12 to 15 is totally enough on desktop. 8 to 10, even less, I would argue, on mobile because people just don't have the time to read. Again, you're trying to reach them within like 5 seconds. If they have to read more than 3 lines of copy, you've lost them. And then also make sure that the headlines can stand alone because you don't know, in digital advertising, you don't know at what point a user is coming into the stream. So again, this goes back to thinking of users driving down the road. If they've missed it, you want to be able to, you want them to be able to pick up the message when they get to the next point. So make sure that the copy can stand alone on its own, and you don't need a whole backstory in order to explain a line. Make sure if you're going to communicate through copy, make sure it's entertaining, or you're at least telling them a story and you're conveying a message through that. If it's not needed, then don't put it in your design or your ad. The call to action. I feel like this slide should actually be like second because no matter what you're designing, you have to have a call to action. You want somebody to do something. What are you trying to get them to do? If it's take the poster for this talk today, the call to action was come to the gallery. This call to action in this case is view the recipe. You should also make sure that you're not just being vague with the call to action. Be explicit. People, especially nowadays, don't want the mystery of knowing where they're going to go. They want to know exactly where they're going to go, where they're going to go, what they're going to get when they get there. So this clearly states, if you click this button, you're going to go and you're going to get this recipe. So make sure they're clear and concise, and if possible, make sure that they're persistent throughout your experience. That goes without saying on print, but on digital, make sure that you have that CTA up throughout, because at any point you want people to be able to jump out. If not, they're likely to just close out of the ad, and that's not what you want. Offering the users choice and control. This is really important for millennials. They like to be able to control their experience. They don't want to be told, go from A to B. They like to decide their own path, how they're going to get from A to B. They want to be able to control it. So in this example, you're actually, again, this goes back to showing the user how to, introducing them to the product, giving them the chance to experience it on their own. So you're letting them choose the top cookie. You're letting them choose the ice cream they want. You're letting them choose the bottom cookie. And so then they're more likely to go into store and make it themselves or purchase it themselves. Adding in interactive elements, again, allows them to play with the ad through videos, carousels of images, gaming too. And then incorporating functionality that gets them to take action. So from here, you want to try to drive them to store or things like that through the CTA to make it really, really strong and drive them home. So again, here are just a few examples of how we've sort of like made these creative best practices and brought them to life. So to the right, I'll just go this way. Right here is the obvious CTA. Get the recipe, designing to the objective. So the objective here is to tell the user that you can do more with Chobani yogurt. So you're giving them an ingredients, you're giving them a recipe to make key lime pie. Here, giving them choice and control, letting them actually flip through a catalog so they can see the products. It's kind of like bringing back that nostalgia of actually getting a Sears, speaking of Sears, a Sears catalog in the mail and flipping through that. And then you can actually, in this ad, you can actually shop through the ad. So you tap on it and you go directly to the store and you can add it to your cart. And then on the right, the far right, or left, and then giving them clear and focused content. So there you have two CTAs. The first one is get directions. So, you want to sort of drive them to, go in and make a reservation. So you're giving them directions there and you're allowing them to make a reservation right through their app. You don't want to give them 2 extra steps by driving them to the website. You want to, if possible, you want to try to get them as few steps as possible to get to your call to action, what you want trying to do. And then separate from that, a lot of these apply to mobile, but there are still some mobile best practices that you should consider because the real estate is smaller. Again, the attention span is even fewer on mobile. People are on the go. Ads are popping up all the time. So here, make sure your content, again, is clear and focused. You have less real estate. You have less time to get the message across. Using high-res imagery, even more important on phones because every 6 months, a new phone is coming out with higher res, higher retina. So you want to make sure that you're always continuously using high-res imagery. Making sure you're designing to the actual use of the phone. So instead of saying click here, you want to use language like tap or swipe. Whatever is natural to the user, because we're on our phones constantly, you want to make sure you translate that over. At Undertone, we also utilize separate features, the 2 at the bottom, where you can actually tap to call from your unit, or you can add it to your passbook or wallet. Or you can use things like haptic touch or GPS, where you can actually give directions and tell a person to walk this way or turn this way, or you can make the phone shake to reveal different pieces of the creative. You could actually get a little bit fun with your mobile. So it just opens up the possibilities for more creative ideas. And then again, how we're putting this in process. So the first one, which is Starbucks ad, that's actually Instagram. So we're actually feeding in live feeds of people using their sip face. And then on the left is an ad for X-Files where the user, it's a magic 8-ball. I hope you guys are familiar with the magic 8-ball, where you shake it and a message is revealed each time you shake the phone. And so what's the process of digital advertising or advertising in general? This is sort of like a bird's eye view of like what happens. The first is what's called the pitch. I hope you all are familiar with the pitch. This is usually when the RFP comes in. Anybody know what RFP stands for? It stands for Request for Proposal. So that's essentially someone requesting your services. So an RFP comes in, and the RFP is considered the Bible. That'll tell you who you're talking to, how much it gets really, really drilled down to how much they're making, what they do on the weekends. Sometimes, the RFP will give the user a personality. They'll call him John, and John likes to go to the movies. John loves Guardians. He loves comic books. He makes $30,000 a year. He lives at home with his mother. Like, it gets really like that in depth. So you have to kind of learn who John is, and you have to sort of pretend that you are John. And as John, what would you want to see in an ad? And then planning and ideation comes into it. So this is where we decide, we're taking John. How are we going to talk to John? What sort of unit is most important to John? Since John lives with his mother, does he have a cell phone? Maybe, maybe not. So maybe we'll concentrate more on desktop executions for John. And then this is less important, but this is what comes into me for my process. So this is how I kick off projects to my team. And then this is where the creative happens. So when the creative comes in, they've taken all this pre-planning that's been done, and they take that all into consideration, and they think, how am I going to talk to John? What pieces of creative do I want to show John? John is a comic book head, so I'm not going to tell him the story of the galaxy. Like, he knows what it is. So I don't have to start from A. I can start from B or D with John. So that sort of lets you know where you can where your creativity can go. And then you deliver it. This is usually when this is just taken to the client, and the client reviews it. They put their notes on it. They say, no, I don't like it. Let's not talk to John anymore. Let's talk to Sally. And then your whole creative, it sort of like ping pongs back and forth between these two for rounds and rounds and rounds. And then this is before the pitch. And so at this point, this is when the client decides, okay, I now want to go and I want to move forward with this concept. I want to move forward with this design. So that's when the IO comes in, which stands for insertion order. That's basically the money. They put the money down, they put the contract down and say, this is how much I'm paying for this media run, and this is what it includes. It includes what are called flights sometimes, where it's, the creative is running from January through March, and then it may include another flight, a second flight, where it's running from May until August. Things like that are received in the IO. Then project management comes along. So, if you've ever worked in the real world, project managers should be your best friends. They're the ones who are saving you from having to go to the client all the time. They also are in charge of the project. They know when things are due, when they should be due. If something happens where the client is not delivering something that they should on time, they're the ones communicating that the timeline is going to change. So they're your best friends, and they keep you on track. Usually at this point, the kickoff is scheduled by project management, and this is when you sort of get on the call with the client and you iron out additional details. So before, you were talking about the possibilities with the pitch, and the client was kicking out ideas of how they envisioned it. This time, they actually have money, so they probably have assets behind it. The Guardians example is a great one, because usually when you're working on an entertainment client, a movie, you don't get assets until the movie's actually been released. So in the pre-IO stage, you're just sort of using assets that are existing, that's been out on the web. Maybe it's from Guardians 1. In this case, you're now receiving new assets from Guardian 2, and they've been released. And all of this is confidential at this point. It probably hasn't been released totally to the public, but it's been released through media and creative. And then again, the creative magic happens. So now you're actually working with the real assets, and you're developing the real concept to eventually go to production. And again, just like before, the timeline sort of ping-pongs back and forth for several rounds between these two. You're tweaking things. You're working with production. That's development. So you're deciding what works, what's not working. You're moving things around. You're shifting things. You're making compromises with what the client wants versus what you can actually deliver, and where you're actually delivering it. So it kind of just goes back and forth from there. And that's pretty much it. I wanted to save a lot of time for questions. So I hope I didn't talk way too fast. I wanted to leave plenty of time. So I'm open for questions. If you want to ask any questions, or if you want to write down any questions and pass it up if you're too nervous to ask, happy to do that. Yeah, so it changes from client to client, and we have different relationships with each of our clients. Guardians, for example, they usually, working in entertainment is not, everybody thinks it's super, super sexy working in entertainment, working on movie posters. It's not as sexy as you would think it is. It involves a lot of, even, I actually went to a talk a few years ago from a guy who actually works on, strictly on movie posters, like that's his only job. And I was shocked to find out that even he doesn't receive assets from the production houses, because the production houses keep everything under wraps. They don't want anything leaked. They don't want anything. And there's so many layers of lawyers and you know, approvals and whatnot. Things may change before it goes to post, which is what you see on the screen. That's considered post. So they're sort of like really tight-knit with what they keep, what they release out to the public. So we're usually just taking, when we're asked to work on something for like Guardians, we're usually just sent the movie poster. So from there, we have the creative license. They'll say, you can use this asset, you can use this asset, you can say this, you can't say that. And so we have to create within those parameters. A lot of time, like I personally think in terms of difficulties, I'd say pharma is the most difficult, financial, work, banking, and then probably entertainment is the next, because there's so many restrictions with it, and it's not as, you know, free as you would think it is. For what was the other, for like autos is another example. They don't release their products to the mass public or to the media agencies until probably a few weeks before it launches. So right now we're currently working on 2018 RFPs for a lot of the auto clients out there. We're not going to get assets. A lot of them release October of this year. We're not going to get assets until probably September. So at that point, you're just sort of creating from what you see on the net. They may send you old assets, so they may send you a 2017 model and say, you know, there's going to be new features. So you kind of have to be creative with what those new features are. You may not know exactly what they are, so you kind of just make it up as you go. And then when you talk to the client, you make sure to mention that. You say, you know, I realize that the new features haven't been approved yet, or they haven't been released to the public, but here, just imagine the possibilities of where we can go with this. So it's kind of like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So tell me more about the team of 6 designers you have. Are they like all skilled in one aspect of design, or is it like you're one guy for 3D, one guy for like animation, one guy for this, one guy for that?
Yeah, so how we hire, how I personally hire is, so all of them, their core responsibility is art direction. So I need to know that you can art direct, or you can take a concept and you can design as well. So you need to be able to take a concept, develop that concept, work from minimal assets, and then design something beautiful, design something that the user can actually, you know, it's useful to the user. And then from there, each one of our designers has separate, like additional secondary skills. We have one girl on the team who's into photography. So at any point, if we need to tap into those other skills, we have someone who's into 3D motioning. So for presentations or whatnot, we'll pull him in and, you know, do something 3D. So each person on the team, and I specifically hire for that, has a different like a secondary set of skills. But their hard skill is designing, especially designing for digital, which I get a lot of portfolios of print, which is great, but again, digital is a totally different world than print, and designing for that is totally different. So I need to be able to make sure that someone can design for digital. Mm-hmm. Can
you give us a little example of what today was like for you? I know you're right. If not today, yesterday.
So most of my day-to-day, I'll be completely honest, is filled with meetings. A lot of people, a lot of juniors, when they come into advertising, they say, I want to be a manager, I want to be a creative director. That title, again, is not as sexy as you might think it is. You're in meetings all day. Most of them are in strategy meetings, like deciding who's going to work on what. whose hard skills are good on what clients or what product or projects, and then managing the team's, timelines and schedules from there. We have a huge, it was just actually announced the other day, we're just now partnering with the AP where we're doing a couple of projects, large-scale projects for them coming up in the next season. So part of my day today was managing that, talking about what exactly are your needs. You need a website, you need an XYZ, you need a campaign from that website, and then deciding what actually we're going to deliver from there. So yeah, that's my day to day. My juniors' day their days are a lot more fun than mine are. So for example, I'll give what one of my juniors did today. So this morning she was kicked off with a project for IKEA. So I sent her the RFP, which I talked about. And I told her I brought out the highlights that she should focus on, who it's targeting, what the product is advertising for, what unit we're going to use. And then she went from there. I let her go off and create. And then she sends me, she goes online, she goes on IKEA website, she pulls up their catalog. If she wants to, she can talk to people in the office who has an IKEA kitchen, like tell me about it. So part of the creative process for them is research and figuring out who they're talking to. Again, I keep talking about that, but it's so important. And then from there, she sends me the designs. I give her edits and say, have you thought about moving this here? Have you thought about changing this color to this? She goes back and revises it, sends it back to the account team. The account team adds their own, creative suggestions to it. And then, so again, it just kind of ping pongs back and forth. And then finally, before I left, she was sending it out. So that was her full day. She did 2 ads today. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us your story? How did you get to Pixel? Like, basically from being a student to being a senior
Yeah.
graphic designer?
Yeah, so when I was in college, I actually was a math major. I always loved art. My uncle was actually an artist. And so it was a little bit easier for me to go into art because I didn't have that shock and awe from my parents, so I was really good at math, and so I thought, hey, it's easy, it comes natural to me, so I might as well do math. And then a professor, I was telling Carlos this in the car, a professor actually plucked me out and was like, this isn't for you. I was going to take the math and go into architecture, and he was like, this isn't what you should be doing. Have you thought about advertising? So he hooked me up with an internship. I worked 2 school years with an internship, and then actually one of the girls who was working there, she was an associate creative director. She told me about Miami Ad School, which is, to talk about Miami Ad School, it's a after college portfolio school. So if you're interested in getting into advertising, you just kind of don't know where to start. If you don't have a portfolio that's getting any traction when you're like sending it out, cold calling to jobs or interviews, I really recommend going to portfolio school because they have all their teachers who actually work in creative agencies. So it's not just, it's not a professor who's, no offense to professors, but it's not someone who's been removed from the design world. They actually leave work and they come and they share the campaigns that they're currently working on. They ask you to help on it. So you may be cutting out assets for a campaign that's actually going to go live. So I went there for 2 years, and their program actually puts you in creative agencies. So I traveled. That's how I got to work in London. That's how I got to at Saatchi in London. That's how I got to work at Crispin in Colorado. And then in the end, they have a portfolio review just like this. You put your work up on the wall. You bring your portfolio. You sit there, and all these agencies come in and talk to you and look at your work. I got a job on the spot and been in New York ever since. That was 12 years ago.
I have an opinion question. Every time in life, obviously, with our professional work, we always hit a ceiling and we think we can't get better than this, but obviously we always can. I'm sure that's happened to you many times.
Oh yeah, happens every day.
But when you think that you are at your prime, how can you go higher?
What I do normally is I either, if I'm working alone, I step away from it. I don't even touch it. I don't even think about it. I put it away. I close my computer. Don't touch it for maybe like 2 days. Then I come back to it with fresh eyes to see what can I do differently. Working in a creative agency, you're never working by yourself. It's, you know, there's no I. It's literally no I in team. We can't go into presentations and say I did this. It's we. So in those situations, we have what's called Slack. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Slack. We put it on Slack, which is kind of like Facebook or like a chat room. We put it on Slack, ask for feedback. There's literally no egos on my team, and I hire specifically for that. Like if I sense that someone has an ego, I don't hire them, because, you know, my creative director asks juniors for, you know, ideas to help his work. I do the same. You have to constantly be open to feedback and open to other people's suggestions, and you know, because you've been working on that probably for 12, 24, you know, 48 hours. You're so connected to it, it's hard for you to see things that are wrong with it. So getting someone else's eyes on it is always the best advice that I could give. Don't be above help. That's pretty much as blunt as I can say it. Like, you know, just ask for help. Don't think that your work is better than anybody else's, because 9 times out of 10, someone can beat it or poke holes in it or find something wrong with it. Mm-hmm.
The attention span of the consumer gets shorter and shorter.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you predict advertisement is heading?
Well, outside of video, which is huge, different forms of reusing what we see. So the next thing that's probably going to hit is augmented reality and virtual reality and 360 experiences. I feel like that's the next thing that's going to like really take over. I mean, advertisers are already kind of exploring that now, you know, and then also different creative ways of how, like I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called experiential advertising, where say you're watching a football game and, you know, instead of the audience flipping over signs of the American flag, experiential advertising is flipping over, you know, something relevant to, you know, a Dorito ad or something like that. So I feel like creative is going to continue to get more creative, because people are tuning out of advertising on their phone. So you have to sort of, I feel like the next best thing is going to be actually putting them in that environment where they are. Yeah, following you around, basically. It's kind of scary, but it's what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It is very scary, and some of the things, some of the vendors that have come in to talk to us about like what they're working on, it's super scary. But I mean, you can't blame them, because we've already opened the gates. You know, when we sign up for Facebook, we're opening ourselves up to all of this, so you can't really be unconnected at this point. Go ahead.
Do you think like working in advertisement gives you like does it open a door towards working abroad, like besides just working like in domestic like companies?
Yeah, definitely. U.S. advertising though is a lot different than Europe, for example, a lot different. So there, pretty much anything goes over there. Here, there's a lot more restrictions and like what you can say, PC, like who is it going to offend, you know, which is, you know, rightfully so, but, you know, over there they just don't care. So just know that going in, if you're interested in working overseas, like I would encourage your portfolio to be a lot more provocative than if you were just taking it to New York. So that's the main difference. The workload over there is a lot more intense as well. Like even New York is pretty intense, but like major cities like London, it's a lot more cutthroat, and where you sort of start in the totem pole is a lot different than here. Here you can get hired as sort of like a junior art director, like off the bat. In London, you start in the studio and you work your way up. So in studio is really like you're retouching things, like you're learning color correction. Like but you have to sort of put in the ranks in order to get, up there. But they have some really amazing designers who know what they're doing. I've seen a lot of portfolios like people who slap the senior title on their portfolio and say they're senior, but their skills really aren't up to par. But I would expect that in Europe, they're all sort of, the bar is like really, really high because of that. Mm-hmm.
Speaking on I guess the workload, when a project comes in and I guess you're given any kind of time frame to complete that, how would you or your team handle any kind of road bumps that come along the way?
So as a manager, it's my job to sort of know my team. So I know who on my team, if something comes in at 5 p.m. and it's due at 7, I know who on my team can take it, who I can trust. Others, it's not that I don't trust them, it's just, if I'm trying to get to the end goal the fastest, these are the people that I'm going to rely on the most. Each person handles stress totally different than the next person, but it's going to happen in your career. You're going to be, you might be stuck in the office at 8 p.m. on a Friday night when all your friends are going out. That's just the nature of the business. If you like to clock in at 9 and leave at 5, advertising is not for you, because the client doesn't care. They don't, because there's major money on the line. There's $1 million campaigns on the line, and you wouldn't think that that much money is on the line, but it is, and you're not really saving lives, but they're spending $1 million on, a campaign that lasts for 15 seconds. They don't care that you have plans with your friends. And that's also part of when I hire, knowing sort of like where they've come from and what their workload has been like in the past. If you come from a creative agency, you probably sort of get it, because you've been there, you've been stuck at the office several days in a row. But it's the beauty of the work, and it's part of why I love it, because no 2 days are the same. So it's kind of fuels my fire a little bit. Mm-hmm.
From an employer perspective, what are your expectations for a good graphic design?
Photoshop, knowing the ins and outs of Photoshop. I talked about color correction, knowing that. We have to do a lot of composites where we're putting 10 images together. If you're putting 10 images together, they all need to match in terms of like where the light source is coming from, the tonal, feeling of it. It all needs to be the same. And it also, to work in advertising, you also need to be able to embody that brand. If Nike doesn't use this type of illustration, why is it in the ad? It needs to be representative of that brand at all times. So that's what I look to my team to know. So if if an RFP comes through for today for IKEA, I expect my designer to know how IKEA talks to their consumers, the products, how they word it, how, if they're listing a product, is it all caps or is it just initial caps? Is it lowercase? Are the buttons corners rounded or are they straight edged? Do they use a sans serif font? Do they use a serif font? Do they use drop shadows? Things like that. Like, it's all in the details, because you may think that the consumer doesn't care, but the client cares, because the client has spent, not only are they spending $1 million on this campaign, they've spent millions of dollars on developing that brand and developing that brand equity. The Nike tick, that's their brand. You can't change that. So you have to respect that brand. You have to, know how that brand speaks. And so I expect all of my designers, that's first and foremost what I expect from my designers. And then secondary, I expect them to be able to meet the deadlines. Again, we work on in a fast-paced environment, and since we're not the agency of record for a lot of agencies, we're sort of held to a different standard. So we could lose the business if we're not delivering on time. Their agency, they can sort of do whatever because they've sort of signed a retainer for them, so they're holding them on for a whole year. Whereas we're sort of project by project. So they have to be able to trust us and know that we're going to deliver on time. So I would say those two are the most, the biggest responsibilities I look for with my team. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Photoshop first and foremost should be your number one. Oh, thanks. You should know Photoshop in and out. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it the way that I do it, because there's so many different ways to skin a cat in Photoshop. But if I tell you that, like I talked about the light source or the tones, if I tell you the tones don't match, I need you to be able to go in and correct it. And I don't want to be able to have to tell you how to do it. I've been there. So so Photoshop first and foremost. If we hire someone, we don't use Illustrator as much, but it definitely helps to know Illustrator. For example, if there's something that needs to be in vector, you need to know how to use it and know the different, How about InDesign? Not as much, because it's web. But I mean, it doesn't hurt. We do have, part of our creative team does handle internal brand marketing, and everybody on my team is responsible for taking a project or two. So it does help to know it, but it doesn't go to say that you can't do it in Photoshop or Illustrator. Not as important. We have a development team. So specifically on my creative team, it's not as important. I'd like for them to know the ins and outs of it, like what the possibilities are, what it can do, especially in terms of HTML. But they don't have to be able to make a ball roll across the screen or something like that. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had like a client that wasn't pleased with your creation?
All the time. If I haven't, I could probably count on one hand the time that a client has been happy the first time around. So, yeah. More often than not, they have revisions or they have corrections for you or suggestions. More often than not. So you have to have a thick skin too. So you have to be able to know that they're not necessarily like, I know that you created it and you probably love what you did. You have to be able to remove yourself from it and realize that their bottom line is their money and their clients and their, I'm sorry?
Whatever they want.
Yeah, yeah, it's whatever they want. They're the customer. It's like working in retail. The customer's always right. So you have to do what they want. I mean, there's also a balance too. You want to be strategic with how you're responding to their, you want to be an expert as well. So if they're telling you they want a learn more button and you know that that's not going to drive the results, it's up to you to learn how to talk to them and tell them, it's based on our best practices. You should do this instead. Mm-hmm.
When a customer asks for some work, do you keep the original files or do you have to give them to the customer?
I keep them. Yeah. Sometimes it's also written in the RFP or written in the contract. But for the most part, like I have Galaxy assets, and my collection of fonts are extensive because the brands, in order for us to work on it, they have to send us their font. So, you start collecting things over the year. So I have stacks of external hard drives of.
If they ask you for the files, would you negotiate with them, or how do you work?
If they're paying, yes. If they don't pay, no, they don't get. That's not my policy, that's our company policy. So if they have signed an IO and it's been plenty of times where we've worked on campaigns and they've paid for it, they've taken those assets and they've taken them to other vendors or they reused them and we've seen them in other places. We can't really do anything because they paid for them. But if they haven't paid for it, they don't get it.
Other criteria that go into pricing besides,
So outside of creative, I mean, that's a charge. That's a flat rate on our rate card. The media, so where they're going to be placed, what they want in. We have a part of our business where we have influencers, where we can have influencers in their campaign. So that right there, the premium is $1 million. We're not even talking about putting some Instagram model in their campaign if they're not coming with $1 million. It depends on also the units they're type of running. I sort of went through some of their units. Some of the mobile units are least expensive than like the full screen takeover, because a lot of like there's different like publisher relationships between all the different units. So that's taken into consideration. Also, I talked about the flight, so how long they're running the campaign. So if they want to run for a full year, that right there is you're starting at $500K. So different things like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, how is the work process? Like, if you guys have clashing projects, like maybe you have something due in September, and you have another thing due in September, and you guys like work individually on each project, or is it like, well, they just focus on this one and jump to this one?
Yeah, so we work individually. So if we get something due in September, that's really great. It's a lot of time. But on my team, I'm not a micromanager. I give my team the freedom to decide how they want to deliver. So if I give someone 5 projects and 2 of them are due tomorrow and 3 of them are due in a week and the next week and the next week, they have to decide how they're going to project manage it themselves, because I'm trying to groom them to be a manager themselves and how to figure out, their process and their timeline. I guess that goes back to hiring. Like I need to be able to know that you're self-sufficient, that you can, I can give you something and you can be okay, like figuring it out. Like you have to be able to figure it out yourself. And then, that goes just to like, if you know that something's not due until September, but it's going to require 3 days worth of Photoshop work, you might want to get started on it earlier, So, and I'm always there to advise. It's not like I'm just leaving them alone and telling them to go away. But I want to foster that like independence in my creatives, because I want them to be able to go on. They're not going to stay at Undertone under me forever. So I need them to be able to go on and, live great careers on their own. And that's part of it, is, being an independent designer and learning how to pace yourself. And I think the longer you're in it, the more you learn like, different tricks, to do something. And you save things along the way. We do a lot of takeovers where the client wants the screen to sort of crack. So I've done that personally probably in 10 different ads. So I know where those files are. That saves me, 15 minutes right there. I can just drag those files over, change a few things, and I'm good to go. So you kind of like, develop your own library, your own system over the years. I don't. I took them all out. Let me see if I can find something. Maybe. I'm going to turn it off of mirroring. Let's see if I can find something really quick. Is this connected to, I'll need the internet. Yeah, up there. Does anybody have any other questions while we set that up? Yeah.
On the project phase, how do you decide who will be the individual working on the project or who teams up?
That's what I said. What I try to do is I try to, even though we're not a traditional advertising agency, I try to model my team after a traditional advertising agency. So I know that X person has worked on, I talked about IKEA. So this person has worked on IKEA, so I try to keep IKEA with them. So any other IKEA products that come through, I know, this person's going to work on it. Or if I hire someone with auto background who came and worked extensively on automotive, I'm more likely to give them work, assign them work in their strengths. And then I always have like reviews with my team to find out like what their interests are. I try to make, since we have so many different clients, I try to make sure that everybody's getting something from each sort of bucket. Sorry, I'm getting emails. From each different bucket. So if you've worked on auto all your life and you've never worked on pharma, I'm going to send you some pharma stuff so you get that pharma experience under your belt. So that again, if you leave, no one pigeonholes you and says, oh, you've only worked on auto for the past 15 years. You can say, no, I've actually worked on pharma, I've worked on CPG, I've worked on retail. Like I have all this experience under my belt. So that's kind of how I try to assign work out. Okay. Let me see if I can find something really quick. Actually, I'll just go to our site and then that'll probably be this.
Is your company offering internships?
Not in the creative department. So we hire freelancers. We actually just hired a round of freelancers, but yeah, the opportunities are always up on our website. And the reason we don't hire interns is because we have so many products, so many units, and it takes at least 3 weeks to learn it. The length of an internship is usually like 6 weeks or 6 to 8 weeks. It's just not worth it. So we hire freelancers, and then we work with them on their schedule, and they come in the office and work that way. And we usually keep them for 3 or so months. Okay, so work.
Have you ever fully hired an intern?
Have we? Nope, not on our team. Nope, because we've never done the intern thing. So I'll show this one. Let me drag it over. So I worked on this campaign. This is for Perrier. And the problem was or not necessarily the problem, but they wanted to introduce new bottles. And this was an artist series, so in conjunction with artists, three or four different artists, they wanted to reveal the new look and feel. So we, used the spray paint concept to reveal the new bottles, and it's got videos in here. And so each time you click on a new video, a new bottle is shown. And the artist actually, I was gonna pause that. And the artist actually created the wall mural as well. I'll show another example. Actually, I'm gonna have to pull it back this way, sorry. So this is a cool one. I didn't work on this one. My creative director did, but it's a really cool one for Imagine Dragons. So Imagine Dragons came to us and was like, we're releasing this new song. Here's the cover art. What can you, they shared the cover art with us. What can you do with it? So we created this experience for them. I think it's got, where you can connect to Spotify and then you can actually listen to the song, and we created all of this motion graphics around it. And then so when you click here, we wanted to add a social component in it. So you can choose what you believe in, and then you take a selfie to post to social. And so that just extends the campaign because people then drive to the website where this also lives.
So it's more interactive.
Yeah.
How long did this, whole live thing take to make?
So they were on a tight deadline because of course they came to us at the last minute. So this whole thing, our normal timeline for a unit like this is 4 weeks. We did this all in 2 weeks. From concept, storyboard, it was 2 rounds of storyboards, them approving it, and they approved it. She left, but they approved it on the spot. So hearts for Imagine Dragons, approving it on the spot. Went into production, so our developer, how do I get out of here? Let me just refresh it. So our developer had to, all of these, and just so you know, all of these are on separate layers because this is considered parallax. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with parallax. So each one of these are on different layers. So my creative director created all of this, and the developer created all of this separately and matched the beat of the little lines or whatever to the music. So he actually had to listen to it and develop at the same time. So he was kind of, it was a mess. But he was actually, so we have, I talked about like our team in different locations. The developer who worked on this was in London, which actually, you know, gave us like 7 more hours to actually work on it. So, you know, little trick there.
Can you speak briefly on some of the non-software or non-technical skills that are useful in the industry, your soft skills in writing, communication, presentation, that are valuable assets?
Yeah. So one of the good things about our company is that we do a lot of training in terms of like public speaking, things like that you would never think that you need as a skill, like email writing, like how the proper way to write an email. Because when you get in the real world and you start communicating with people, you realize that you write an email to someone and say they have to send that to the client, they're just going to copy and paste it. They're not going to rewrite what you wrote. So writing a proper email from the get-go is something that our HR team trained us on. Also going to conferences, figuring out like what other people are doing out there. We have always, everybody on my team gets approval to go to a conference every year. It doesn't necessarily have to be connected to advertising or design, because I personally feel like, you know, you can find design in anything. Well, everything is literally design in it. So I think it's important for them to be exposed to different things. So that's also something that we encourage on our team. And then we also do one other thing that's like, that helps with, I think we talked about speed, we do monthly challenges. So we say the challenge this month actually was to create, I'll talk about last month because I don't really know the details of this month. Last month was our creative director, he and I worked together and we gave everybody on the team a nickname. Then we drew names from a hat. And then so-and-so was assigned Dayna, my nickname, and you have to design a movie poster and create a story around Dayna's nickname. And we'll give them a time limit for them. We'll say you have 48 hours to do that. So that helps them sort of, on top of their work, that helps them sort of create, you know, speed. So things like that, everything that we do kind of has a purpose. We're not just like, you know, making them go design stuff, but it also gives them a break from doing, digital ads all the time where, you know, they're having to like follow the guidelines of, you know, some big brand. It gives them a little bit more freedom where they can go out and be creative and be free. So things like that we do, I consider those soft skills that we do all the time.
If you're working with established brands such as like do they provide their brand book with their brand guidelines to your team?
We request it. We prefer it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But a lot of times you can really learn a lot of, you learn to sort of study and know a brand's brand guidelines just by looking at their like site, for example. Because sometimes, even though they'll send their brand guidelines, you'll realize that it doesn't translate to digital. For example, you know, a really, I can't see anything right here, but some clients have really complicated logos, for example. those don't translate that well when you move to, you know, a 300 by 50, which is the size of a mobile banner. Those don't translate well over to mobile. So you realize that, you know, they don't have the brand guidelines, so you kind of have to be, you toe that line with like asking, is this acceptable? Can we change this a little bit? But they don't always send it. It definitely helps. But I'd say I probably, for every 10 that don't send it, you know, it's rare and few and far between, but it definitely helps. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have people that do it sort of like as a side project, but their core responsibility is design, and we sometimes use it a lot for internal brand marketing. For example, if we want to do like a quick reel or something, we'll pull in someone with videography experience from the team, or photography experience. If, for example, I used to have a slide in here that talked about how we sort of like literally pull something out of nothing. For example, Hershey's came to us and was like, we need to create we're coming out with a new flavor of Hershey Kiss. Of course, we didn't have what it looked like. We didn't have the wrapper. We just had, you know, we knew that it was coming around at Christmas, and we knew that it was going to be something new. So we actually, whoever worked on it actually just went to CVS, bought a bag of kisses, took pictures of it, and then just created from there. So, you know, sometimes we do little things like that. If we know that we want, you know, someone doing something really specific with their hand, maybe they're like, you know, swinging a bat in a way, like we'll set up a little photo shoot, and we'll do it. Sometimes that's quicker than like going on the internet and like searching for the exact angle that you need. So we do things like that. It's not necessarily that we're taking that photography and we're putting it in a live campaign. Sometimes it's just to help get the concept across, the story across. Mm-hmm.
I don't understand if you try to kind of predict how the product is going to be and you advertise it. How is it that when the real product come out in the market is, how does it look when you see an advertisement that doesn't match the product itself?
Usually when we do that, that's sort of in the pre-IO stage. So that's before they've signed on with us, they've given us any sort of money. So they know at that point, they know that we don't have any like real assets. We're just sort of trying to show them and help them envision what their real assets can turn into. So if they want to do some sort of, we do around the holidays, since I'm using this as an example, we do a lot of like gift guides, like suggestions, like who are you shopping for? Are you shopping for your mom? Are you shopping for a kid? And we'll sort of show them what that campaign will look like in sort of a gift guide concept, if that makes sense. And then when they send us the real assets, we'll either, you know, start the campaign off from fresh and say, you know, they may say at that point, the concept has totally changed. We've totally changed our direction. We no longer want to do a gift guide. So then we'll re-concept for that once we have the real assets. And if it doesn't change, then we'll just swap in the real assets and maybe add, like, you know, different things that sort of relate back to the real product packaging. Does that help answer your question? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No PCs. No PCs at all. No offense if anyone likes PCs, but the developers work on PCs. They actually have several computers that they work on, but we all design on Macs. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in regards to like work days, is it just like a set amount of hours when the team comes into work, or is everyone like taking stuff home and working on it?
Again, that goes back to like whoever, like what their work process is. I personally don't care when you come in, as long as the work is done. If I give you a project that's due by end of day, and end of day in the advertising world is loose. Like it's not like most places it's like 5 p.m. For us, that could be 8 p.m. So if you have to take it home, that's on you. You know, you have the deadline. However you want to like, you know, divvy that work up. That's what I leave the responsibility to the designer to determine. You know, and everybody has their own speeds too. Like I know all of my designers' speed. So I know that if something, you know, again, like I said, if something is due in 2 hours, I know I can't give it to this person because A, they're going to panic. B, you know, it takes them a little bit longer because they have to like process it. They process it differently. Everybody has their own sort of way they think through a project. And I know that and I learned that about each one of my team members.
So, most of my friends are pitching to corporations now, big firms. What's that? I mean, I kind of talk about pitches too in the process. How do you guys go about? I mean, I know now you've gone through this process, right? So, how do you go and pitch, and how do you set up that environment?
Yeah. So our pitch process is a lot different than when I worked on the agency side, that pitch process is a lot different than what we do. I'll talk about both. So now our pitch process is usually just through the RFP. So it's a one-off campaign where we're trying to like woo them with one sort of like solution to one specific set of problems. The pitch process on the advertising side, the creative agency side, is a lot different because usually you're trying to win that business. You're trying to get them to retain you for X amount of whatever the contract is, a year, 2 years, 3 years. So whoever has Nike nowadays, I mean, they kind of like split their business up, you know, between several different agencies. But like when Wyden had them, that, you know, the process of pitching them, they would, you know, fly them in, they would create experiences for them. We pitched Porsche one time, and the creative director was like hell-bent on bringing in an actual Porsche. I was like, you know, as a junior at the time, I was thinking, you know, they've seen a Porsche, they don't really need it, but there's like no limits to what you do in a pitch. You want to try to get them to sort of see it from all different angles, and you pitch different like experiences through that. So the pitch process, if you ever work on new business, it's you have to be really patient. You're not going to leave at even 8 p.m. You expect to be there overnight because there's tons of different people involved and there's tons of different ideas that are thrown out, and most likely all of them are going to be executed. So you have to sort of help out and pitch in and help with all the different executions. And then the pitch is like a huge thing for the agency. Like, everybody is focused on the pitch that day, that one meeting. Usually, like, you know, everybody's usually involved in that in some way or some form of fashion, whether it's, you know, you're helping greet the client or you're making sure you're working on something cool when the client walks by. Like, it's all a tease, it's all set up, it's all, you know, it's all choreographed to help woo the sort of the client. It's fun, but it's tiring. I think somebody else had a question over here, but oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just had a sort of personal opinion about I can tell like you choose your team members very carefully. And to me that's really important as far as like the design aspect, as far as making like quality stuff. Because you're forming like the A team.
Yeah, and I mean, skills are part of it, but also culture is a part of it too, because you know, like I talked about the pitch, who do you want to be working next to for 12 hours in a day? Like, you know, you hire people who you get along with, who you can, you know, go out and, you know, hang out with and have a drink with after work. Culture is important. You have to be able to talk to that person and, you know, have a conversation with that person. So you know, whenever I interview, I always check off, like, will this person fit in with the rest of the people on my team? Are they going to be the oddball out? You know, are they a hothead? Or, you know, I have to think about all of that. It's not just skills. I mean, that's the driver, but there's other components to it as well.
So how many projects do you do on a weekly basis?
Oh my God. Me personally, not as much. Again, I talked about, like, when you become a manager, it's you're less in the weeds doing the work. It's more about you're helping your team do the work. So I'll give an example for a junior designer. On average, so there's 5 days in a week, I'd say they probably do about 10 to 13 campaigns in a week. So that's average like two a day, 1 to 2 a day. And then again, I give them the freedom. If they need more time, they know how to manage their work. If they need more time, they can take more time, but they have to speak up for that extra time. You know, they have to communicate to their project manager and say, you know, this is going to require 13 hours worth of Photoshop work. That means this is going to push this project back. This is going to push that project back. And then I help them along the way. So if I know that there's deadlines that they're working on, I'll reassign it to someone else who I know can take it off of their plate. So, you know, I never want, you know, my team to feel like they're drowning. But, you know, so I help them along the way and I have check-ins with them, you know. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So does your team give you like a weekly list of what they're working on, or they just kind of?
No, I know what they're working on. I keep track of what they're working on, and they CC me on all emails. So when there's something that they've completed or finished, I check it off. We have like a that's what was in there, the Salesforce thing. That's sort of how I keep track of what everybody's working on. You know, and it has the details of the project. It has when it's due. So it has, you know, how much the campaign is worth. Things like that. So when they finish, I check it off, and then I either assign them something else or I give them like a little bit of breathing room to sort of, you know, get their bearings. But yeah, I know what they're working on. They don't. Some proactively do that. Some, you know, that's their working style, and I'm okay with that. They like to say, you know, here's what I worked on today. Here's what I accomplished. And I mean, I actually think that's probably a good thing when you're first starting out, because it gives you, when it comes time for like review time, for example. You kind of already have that, you know, you have the receipts of that, basically. You know, you have all the emails that says, this is what I accomplished. You know, you can actually go through and count. I completed, you know, 100 campaigns in the course of a year. You know, that really helps you get ahead of the game a little bit. So it's not a bad idea to do it. Oh, I love what I do. I love what I do. I mean, it's, you know, it's, like I said, I knew going in, I wanted to do something that, I didn't want to work at a bank. You know, I wanted to be able, every day it's different for me. I wanted to, you know, I love going in and not knowing exactly what I have to do for the day and figuring it out, you know, and I love that. Mm-hmm.
What's an advice from your heart how to succeed in this field?
Oh my God. Do you really want advice from me? What would I say? I guess one thing that I've always carried with me is just like, I've just been true to who I am and just true to like what I like to do. I've always been super transparent with my managers and saying, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to work on. How are you going to help me get there? You know, because it's as a manager, it's their job to help you get to where you want to go. So I've always had a path of like where I've always known 5 years down the road where I want to be. What do I want to do in my career? So I've known that path. I may not have known how I'm going to get there, but I know what the end goal is. And I've talked about it again, like help. I've asked for help. How do, you know, I want to do this. Help me get there. I'm not above asking for help. So I would encourage everybody, if you're getting in this career, it's a cutthroat, especially as a woman of color. You know, it's cutthroat. So you have to be able to ask for help, and you have to be able to stand on your own and know exactly what you're going to accept and where you want to go and what you want to stand for. So I think that's probably the best advice that I could give. I don't consider myself an expert on advice, but that's just kind of what I've just always been kind of true to myself, and like, you know, and I've treated people along the way how I want to be treated. That's how I treat my team. How would I want to be managed? I don't want someone standing over my shoulder. I want someone to give me the freedom to sort of decide how I need to do it. So that's kind of how I always managed my team, and how I've kind of approached working in the field. Mm-hmm. I haven't personally, but yes. And I can't say who it was, but in my former agency, we turned down a client because just their expectations, not only their expectations, their rate for what they were willing to pay for was so low, and we knew that like we were putting in extra work for what, you know, sorry, that's my, see, I'm always on. They were asking for just like unrealistic expectations from us. So at that point, it's not the creative's decision. It's usually higher ups decisions. They have to decide like, is it in the end, is it really worth having that client? Is the headache of, you know, our employees and like, you know, just the culture of our agency that we're trying to create to try to, you know, because it's also you're trying to attract other clients. So if you're burning out your team, you're burning out your employees, like is it worth it really just trying to hold on to that one client who probably isn't, like I mentioned, they weren't paying that much. So it's not worth it. So you just cut ties and you move on.
For these guys that are just starting out, what do you recommend?
Get your portfolio up and running. Get a website. Make sure your website is nice. Look on, you know, Behance and Dribbble and all these other sites. Pinterest, you know, has inspiration of websites. Look on there, those. You know, figure out what's nice and what's appealing to you. Get opinions on it. If you have just a bunch of print work, I would encourage you to do what's called spec work, where it's just you pick a client and you come up with a campaign in digital, and then also make sure you have something on mobile, something that goes across all screens. Your portfolio is your key to getting in the door. I don't look at resumes, to be honest. I look at work, and then I look at your resume just to make sure that I don't like haven't run into you in the past. But yeah, I look at your work first, and I also spend probably like I talked about the attention span. I probably spend like 3 seconds on your portfolio. If I don't see anything that I want to click on, I move on and I close it. So you have to be able, and because of the number of resumes that I get in portfolios, I don't have time to like look through every single thumbnail to make sure you can design. I need to be able to see it from the get-go. Do things like create your own logo. Like create, what is your identity? You should have an identity, and it should be carried throughout your portfolio. For example, I had a portfolio once that I remember it, so it is memorable, but I didn't hire her. I didn't even call her in. But it was, I think her last name had something to do with a cookie. So her entire website was about cookies. And it just annoyed me, so I just closed out of it. You know, so don't do anything gimmicky. Like, nobody cares that your last name is Oreo. It's, you know, it's all about the work. You know, make it about the work. Like, you know, don't be gimmicky. Do not. Don't put music on your site. Don't do any flashy like rollovers. Don't have any flipping tiles. Simple. Keep it simple. So they all go through HR, and then she only forwards me the ones that she thinks that I would approve. She kind of knows my style now. The last one that we actually just hired for, I think the first day there was like 375 applicants, and she looks through every one of them. I don't. So she probably only sent me, I think she sent me about 15, and I interviewed 5. 2 in Chicago and 3 in New York, and we hired 1 in New York. Yeah. Any other questions? That's it? It's free advice.
When you mentioned when you were working in Europe and how they had like very, I guess, little rules on what you could put out there, what would you say, I guess, was the weirdest thing you saw, or that was really
The weirdest thing, the weirdest country to work for is Germany by far. I worked on a campaign. I didn't even know what it was for because I couldn't read it, but the idea was they wanted a pig to poke the screen to eat the publisher page, so we can manipulate the page on in our units, meaning you can actually take the publisher, it takes a screenshot of the publisher page, and then you can do whatever you want from there. You can cut it up, you can open it up like a curtain, you can fold it up like a box. So they wanted the pig to poke to look like it was poking the window, eat the publisher page, and then throw it up. So that's what I worked on. But I had no idea what it was. I didn't know what it was for. And then the end frame, there was this guy, this like redhead guy, and he was sitting holding the pig. And then there was a video, and that was the ad. Still today, I don't even know what it was for. I couldn't even like recall what the brand was, but it was memorable though. It was memorable, and I'm sure it like performed really well. But yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just put this down here.